We have a presentation today dubbed Why Dealerships Are Super Awesome Businesses, which is a term that we've trademarked. You won't find that in any business school textbook. We try to do everything we can to help the value of our clients' businesses, so being a little silly sometimes can break the edge. But anyway, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we see dealerships. Your perspective as lenders, you may have already seen this, but we just wanted to emphasize it. So if you could go to the first slide, please. One of the reasons why dealerships perform so well is that they are supported by global manufacturers. So a lot of these are hometown businesses. They might have 50 or 100 employees, but they succeed because they've got factories, OEMs from around the world that spend billions, really tens of billions of dollars per year designing products for them to sell. Those OEMs then provide tens or hundreds of billions of dollars a year in marketing benefits to the dealers, as well as financing for their customers, and they provide dealers a protected area in which they can sell their cars. They also provide dealers $200 plus an hour to repair the vehicles when they need to be repaired. So they have a tremendous amount of support from these global companies to make sure that they continue to sell products that are in demand and that the customers can afford them and that the product keeps working even if they break. There are almost no economies of scale in our industry, which is something that has been a goal for many of the larger consolidators. But so far, we've seen that a good mom and pop operator can perform just as well as a global CEO. So we haven't seen massive consolidations as we have in almost every other retail industry. And if a dealer does get in trouble, there's usually a ready buyer standing with cash to purchase that business. So we almost never see dealerships just close. And another thing to realize about dealerships is that they really are not a business. They really have 4 or 5 different businesses. They have a new car department that sells new vehicles. They have a used vehicle department that sells used vehicles, of course. And those are complementary. So right now we've had a pandemic where the supply of new vehicles has fallen. As a result, consumers have been switching to used vehicles. So used vehicle sales have been going up at dealerships. Sometimes during a recession, new and used vehicle sales fall. That means that consumers have got to keep their existing vehicles on the road. So the fixed operations department sometimes can grow even in the midst of a recession. And another thing which we're starting to see a little bit is that during the pandemic, the number of miles driven has fallen significantly, which is not great for vehicle sales or service, right? Because it means the cars aren't wearing out as much. But all those dealers that have reinsurance companies where they've sold extended service contracts to their customers, those customers are not repairing the vehicles. And so the profits in those reinsurance companies are going to skyrocket here, we believe, in the next year or two. Lastly, we have on here that dealers are an essential business. I think something like 90% of households have a car. They rely upon that vehicle to get to their job or to pick up the kids from school or to go play. Transportation in the form of buses and subways is declining. Ride sharing, which was growing and creating a substitute for people owning vehicles, has plummeted because people don't feel comfortable sitting in a shared vehicle. And sadly, we've seen a bit of an exodus from our cities where people who may still want to live in that city and work in that city feel the need to have a home outside the city, and that home requires a car. So I think for a number of reasons, the dealerships have done particularly well in this pandemic. We'll get to that in a minute. Next slide, please. The cost side. We know that Chrysler and General Motors went bankrupt during the last recession. They had extremely high fixed costs. Dealers are the opposite. Dealers are a far better business model than manufacturers. This chart shows that only about 11% of the costs that dealers have in a typical year are fixed in the form of rent, utilities, taxes, et cetera. And often the rent they have is really money they're paying to themselves. They own the dealership and a real estate in a separate entity. So they could reduce the rent if they wanted to or needed to keep the business viable. So it's just an extremely flexible business. It's really more than one business that's under that roof. And as a result, could you go to the next slide, please? As a result, it's extremely stable, our industry. You've seen in the last 10 years, we've had about 18,000 dealerships. They're not a lot opening, which is good because that means that when we have growth, it goes into the existing dealers. You'll see that we did have a decline during the Great Recession. That was really due to Chrysler and General Motors choosing to terminate the franchise agreements of a few thousand dealers. I think in retrospect, they believed that was a mistake. They just ended up losing sales. They didn't really save any money. So we don't expect that the dealership count is going to decline because the vast majority of them are profitable and going to be viable over the long term. Next slide, please. So for years, we've kind of been wondering, gee, when's this recession going to hit? We've had this expansion for a decade. Sooner or later, we have to have a recession. Well, here it is. You can see here that we had about 17 million units, new units a year sold for the past 5-6 years. This year, we're going to see about a 20% decline, down to 13.5 million. So for many industries, losing 20% of your top line is devastating to your bottom line. And we've seen a number of retailers just go bankrupt during the last 4 months of the pandemic. That's not happening in the auto retail world. In fact, I don't know of a single dealership that's closed during this pandemic. Next slide, please. This shows the pre-tax profits that the average dealership is making across the United States. This is a Mercedes store in southern Florida and a Kia store in northern Michigan, for instance. This is the average of that. And you can see that coming out of the last recession, dealerships have been making about $1.3 million to $1.5 million every year for the past 8 years. So they've been pretty steadily profitable. This year, in the midst of recession, a number of dealerships were closed in March and April. That started to rebound in May. And then June, July, and we believe also August are going to be record profit months for most retailers. So year to date, the average retailer is down about 22% in pre-tax profit. I think when the July and August numbers factor in, we're going to be at or above profits from last year. So again, in the midst of the recession, dealers are performing surprisingly well. Next slide, please. Blue sky value. This is really a measure of goodwill, intangible value of a dealership. It's what somebody would pay above the asset value for a dealership. You can see over the last decade, dealerships have been trading between $5 and $7 million in goodwill typically. After the first quarter, we estimated dealerships had fallen in value about 10% from where they were at year-end 2019. Based upon the bids we're getting for the companies we're selling now, that number has rebounded at least halfway back to the values pre-pandemic. We're only seeing a small reduction in value in the minds of buyers. So again, in the midst of this pandemic, the worst health crisis to hit our country and economic crisis to hit our country in dozens of years, dealership values have not been harmed. Next slide, please. This chart shows the value of publicly traded auto retailers. The gray bar is for the franchise dealers like AutoNation and Lithia and Sonic. The dark red bar is used retailers like Carvana and CarMax. And the kind of pink bar on the far right there, that's for the S&P 500. And you'll see year to date, the public retailers have performed better than the S&P 500. So our sector is performing far better than average. The public retailers are up 25% compared to just 5% for the S&P. And if you look back over a year, even 3 years, the performance still exceeds the S&P 500. So I think it's a remarkable job what dealers have been able to do. You know, auto retail has been considered to be a leading indicator where we go into recession before the rest of the country and we come back out sooner. But during this pandemic, perhaps because of all the stimulus dollars that have been spent, auto retailers have not really led anybody into a recession. And if anything, we've been performing better during the recession. Next slide, please. So if many of you have read about Carvana, I mean, Carvana today has the highest market value of any auto retailer by far. I'll pull it up here quickly, but I believe Carvana's market capitalization is about $35 billion. 35.5, which is more than all the publicly traded franchise retailers together combined. So they've just exploded in value, and you ask yourself, well, why is that? Are they making lots of money? No. Today, the company's still losing money. I think investors believe that they are an Amazon-type competitor, and they're going to disrupt the market, and they're going to be able to take a lot of share from existing dealers and do so profitably. And one way that they're doing that is by just making the purchase of a car far easier, more pleasant, and transparent for consumer than what has historically been the case when a customer went into a car dealership. You can see here on the screen, it's a little bit hard, but I encourage you to go and look at their website on your own. It's by far the best website in the industry, and they've only been out in business for about 5 years. But you can buy a car online, you can sell your car online, you can go pick it up if you want to, they'll deliver it to you. So during a pandemic where people are not really comfortable going and spending hours in a dealership, this type of service is really appealing. And our sense is that once customers realize it's okay to spend $15,000, $20,000, $40,000 buying a used car, sight unseen online, that a higher number of people will be willing to do this as well. They've got a money-back guarantee. It's very transparent. They claim they're saving customers money, very highly rated dealership experience, et cetera. So Glenn Mercer is going to come on a little bit and talk about what the future dealership looks like. I'm going to be keen. I'll be listening to that as well. He's got brilliant insights. But in my opinion, Carvana so far is setting a very high level for how good the customer experience could be. This is something that could be adopted by franchise retailers as well, and I hope they do, because it is attractive to a decent number or percentage of customers. Next slide, please. So one of the organizers here asked me to say, what could go wrong, so to speak? If you were a lender, what would you want to know? And, so far I mentioned that mom and pop retailers have been able to compete really successfully against the AutoNations and the Lithias of the world. They could offer great customer service, the same products, same customer experience, et cetera. But I think that technology is now going to begin to differentiate smaller operators with larger operators. Some of that will just come from search. People are looking at their phones and they're saying, hey, I need to get a used car, I want to get a Honda. So if you type in used Honda near me, it's not going to be your neighboring Honda store that shows up. It's going to be a CarMax or Carvana or a large dealership group that's able to spend the money to get the eyeballs there in the paid search. Part of it is because they're just paying, but part of it is because the natural algorithms of Google, et cetera, look for selection and eyeballs. Where are people going? They're going to where the biggest inventories are. So larger dealer groups are going to be able to consolidate their inventory under one website and more easily attract eyeballs. And I think that over time, smaller operators may have a harder time competing with that type of selection and convenience. So if you're lending to these dealers, you definitely want to be lending to the dealers you believe are going to be successful in taking share, not the ones who you are concerned might be losing share and their business could become less viable. So I've been saying how super awesome the businesses are. I do believe that technology can help the better retailers and can harm those that are not as astute putting it to work for them. So I'd be asking yourself, when I look at my clients, are they good operators? Are they deploying technology? Are they taking market share? What's their customer satisfaction like? Are they growing? Are they able to show that they can find assets, the other dealerships that they want to grow or buy, incorporate those well, have them perform better post-closing? Do they have a viable management team? Are they going to be here for the long term? Or might they be one of the retailers that sells out to a consolidator, in which case, presumably you'd lose that client. So those are a few questions that I would ask. I don't want to make it all rosy and auto retail. Clearly, there's some changes that are coming, and Glenn will talk to us about that. That will provide both opportunities and threats to dealers out there.